I am sitting here at my kitchen table staring at this wedding invitation from my little brother Marcus. My hands are actually shaking as I hold this small piece of paper that fell out of the envelope. It is my mother's handwriting. I would recognize it anywhere, even after all these years. The note simply says, "We were wrong. Please come." 16 years ago, when I was 12 years old, my parents decided to teach me what they called independence during what was supposed to be our annual family trip to visit my grandparents in Colorado. That summer day started like any other family vacation, full of excitement and anticipation for the adventure ahead. Before I tell you what happened next, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you have not already. You are going to want to hear how a 12-year-old boy survived 80 miles from home with nothing but the clothes on his back and $50 in his pocket. My family seemed pretty normal back then. My dad, Richard, was 42, working as a traveling salesman for an auto parts company. My mom, Patricia, was 38 and worked as a nurse at the local hospital in Phoenix, Arizona. My little brother Marcus was only 9 years old at the time, and he looked up to me like I was his hero. Every summer since I could remember, we would pack up our old Ford Explorer and drive up to Durango, Colorado to visit my grandparents on my mom's side. Grandpa Johnson always promised to take me fishing at the lake behind their house, and Grandma Johnson would have fresh apple pie waiting for us when we arrived. These trips were the highlight of my year. The night before we left, I spent hours packing my fishing gear, my favorite books, and enough clothes for the 2-week stay. Marcus was bouncing off the walls with excitement, asking me every 5 minutes if it was time to go yet. The morning we left, everyone seemed to be in great spirits. Dad loaded up the car while Mom packed a cooler full of sandwiches and snacks for the road. We had our usual routine of stopping at the gas station to fill up and grab some candy for the trip. Marcus and I would always get the same things, Skittles for him and a Snickers bar for me. The first few hours of the drive were perfect. We played our traditional car games like I Spy and 20 Questions. Marcus fell asleep against my shoulder while I watched the Arizona landscape change from desert to mountains. About halfway through the trip, I started noticing my parents talking in hushed tones in the front seat. I could not make out most of what they were saying, but I caught words like bills, money, and stress. Dad's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, and Mom kept looking out the passenger window with a worried expression. When we stopped at our first gas station in Flagstaff, everything still seemed normal enough. We stretched our legs, used the restroom, and got back on the road. But as we got closer to Colorado, something in the atmosphere shifted. The cheerful music on the radio was turned down low, and my parents barely spoke to each other. Marcus was still sleeping, completely unaware of the growing tension in the car. I tried to ask if everything was okay, but Dad just said they were tired from driving. When we reached the second gas station in Cortez, about 80 miles from my grandparents' house, I had no idea that this would be where my childhood would end forever. The gas station in Cortez was one of those big truck stops with multiple pumps and a large convenience store. Dad pulled up to a pump and turned off the engine, but instead of getting out to fill up the tank, both my parents just sat there in silence. I could feel the tension radiating from the front seat like heat from a furnace. Finally, Mom unbuckled her seatbelt and got out of the car without saying a word. Dad followed her, and they walked over to the side of the building where they thought Marcus and I could not see them. From inside the car, I watched my parents having what looked like a very heated argument. Dad was gesturing wildly with his hands, and Mom kept shaking her head back and forth. I could see that she was crying, even from that distance. Marcus woke up and immediately sensed something was wrong. He looked at me with those big brown eyes and asked the question I was dreading to hear. "Are Mom and Dad getting divorced?" I honestly did not know what to tell him, so I just said that sometimes adults need to talk about grown-up things. After what felt like forever, our parents walked back to the car. Dad's face was red with anger, and Mom's eyes were puffy from crying. They both got back in without explaining what had happened. The silence in the car was so thick you could cut it with a knife. We drove for another 20 minutes to a small rest area, and once again, our parents got out to continue their discussion in private. This time I could see Mom pointing back toward the car while Dad kept crossing his arms and shaking his head. When they returned to the car this time, something had fundamentally changed. Dad turned around in his seat to look directly at me, and his expression was harder than I had ever seen it before. "Diamond," he said, using the serious tone that usually meant I was in trouble. "We need to talk to you about something important. You are 12 years old now, almost a teenager, And your mother and I think it is time you learned some real independence." I had no idea what he meant by independence, but something about the way he said it made my stomach drop. Mom was staring straight ahead through the windshield, refusing to make eye contact with me. Dad continued explaining that real men need to know how to take care of themselves, and that they had decided this trip would be a good opportunity for me to prove I was growing up. The confusion in my head was overwhelming. What did any of this have to do with visiting Grandpa and Grandma? Dad started the car again and drove us to an even larger gas station just off the highway. It was called Riverside Gas Station, and it had a big sign advertising food, fuel, and lodging. As we pulled into the parking lot, I noticed several 18-wheelers parked in the back and a steady stream of travelers going in and out of the store. Dad parked the car near the front entrance and turned off the engine one final time. Then he said the words that would change my life forever. "This is where you are going to show us you can be a man, Diamond." Dad reached into his wallet and pulled out two $20 bills and a 10. He handed me the $50 and said, "You have enough money here to figure out how to get to your grandfather's house. It is only 80 miles from here, and there are plenty of ways for a smart boy like you to make that happen." I stared at the money in my hand, completely unable to process what was happening. This had to be some kind of joke, right? Maybe it was a test to see how I would react, and then they would laugh and tell me they were just kidding. But when I looked at my dad's face, there was no hint of humor or playfulness. He was completely serious. "You are joking, right, Dad?" I asked, my voice starting to crack with panic. "This cannot be real." Mom finally turned around to look at me, and I saw something in her eyes that I had never seen before. It was a mixture of guilt and resignation, like she knew what they were doing was wrong but felt powerless to stop it. "Your father is right, Diamond," she said quietly. "You need to grow up and learn how to handle things on your own." The reality of the situation hit me like a physical blow to the chest. They were actually going to leave me here alone, 80 miles from anywhere I knew, with nothing but $50 and the clothes on my back. "I am only 12 years old," I pleaded with them. "I do not know how to get to Grandpa's house by myself. I do not even know anyone here. Please do not do this to me." Marcus had woken up completely by now and was starting to understand what was happening. He began crying and reached over to grab my arm. "Do not leave my brother here," he sobbed. "He did not do anything wrong. Why are you being so mean?" Dad's jaw was set in a hard line, and he opened Marcus's door from the outside. "Marcus, get out of the car right now," he commanded. "We are leaving." Marcus refused to let go of me, wrapping both arms around my waist and crying harder. I found myself trying to comfort him, even though I was terrified myself. "It is going to be okay, buddy," I whispered, though I had no idea if that was true. Dad physically pulled Marcus away from me and carried him to the front seat while he kicked and screamed. Mom got out of the car to make room, but she still would not look directly at me. I scrambled out of the back seat, thinking maybe I could reason with them one more time. "Mom, please," I begged. "I promise I will be good. I will not complain about anything for the rest of the trip. Just please do not leave me here." For just a moment, I saw her resolve waver. She looked like she wanted to say something, maybe even change her mind. But then Dad slammed Marcus's door shut and walked around to the driver's side. As they drove away, I ran after the car for about 50 yards, screaming and crying for them to come back. But the Ford Explorer just kept getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely around a bend in the highway. I stood there in the middle of the gas station parking lot, completely alone for the first time in my life. The sun was starting to set, and I realized that in a few hours I would be a 12-year-old boy with nowhere to sleep and no one to help me. I walked into the gas station in a daze, still hoping this was all some terrible nightmare I would wake up from. The woman behind the counter was a middle-aged Hispanic lady with kind eyes and graying hair. Her name tag said Rosa. When she saw my tear-stained face and the lost expression I must have been wearing, she immediately came around the counter to kneel down next to me. "What is wrong, honey?" she asked gently. "Where are your parents?" I tried to explain what had happened, but the words came out in broken sobs. Rosa's face went through a range of emotions, from confusion to shock to anger. She called for her manager, a tall man in his 50s named Mr. Thompson, who listened to my story with growing disbelief. They both wanted to call the police immediately, but I was terrified that would only make things worse somehow. What if my parents got in trouble and never came back for me at all, Mr. Thompson tried calling the number I gave him from my grandparents, but there was no answer. It was getting late, and they would probably be asleep already. Rosa brought me a sandwich and a bottle of water from the deli section, refusing to let me pay for it. As the evening wore on, it became clear that I was going to have to spend the night somewhere. The gas station did not have any rooms available, and Mr. Thompson was not allowed to let customers stay inside overnight. I ended up behind the dumpster area in the back of the building, using some cardboard boxes I found to make a makeshift bed. Rosa brought me a thin blanket from her car and promised to check on me throughout the night. As I lay there in the dark, listening to the sound of trucks coming and going, I could not stop thinking about what I had done wrong to deserve this. Why did my parents stop loving me? Was I really such a burden that they had to abandon me on the side of the highway? The temperature dropped significantly after midnight, and I was shivering despite the blanket. I could hear coyotes howling in the distance, which made every shadow seem threatening. I cried, until there were no tears left, and then I just lay there staring up at the stars, feeling smaller and more alone than I ever imagined possible. This was supposed to be the start of a fun vacation with my family, but instead it had become the worst night of my entire life. When the sun came up the next morning, I was stiff, cold, and hungrier than I had ever been in my life. Rosa arrived for her morning shift and immediately came to check on me. She brought me a hot cup of coffee and a breakfast burrito again, refusing to let me pay. Mr. Thompson showed up shortly after and told me he had been thinking about my situation all night. He offered to let me work around the gas station doing small jobs like cleaning the restrooms and stocking shelves in exchange for food and a safe place to stay. I spent the next 5 days living this way, learning more about survival and independence than most kids learn in years. I had to budget my $50, carefully spending only what I absolutely needed for essentials like soap and a toothbrush. Rosa and Mr. Thompson became like surrogate parents, teaching me how to take care of myself and showing me kindness when I needed it most. Other employees and regular customers began to notice me and would slip me extra food or a few dollars when they thought I was not looking. On my 4th day there, I met a truck driver named Jake, who was probably in his 60s. He had weathered hands and a gray beard, and something about him reminded me of my grandfather. Jake would stop at this gas station regularly on his route, and he started talking to me during his breaks. When he heard my story, he was furious. No parent should ever abandon their child like that, he told me. Being a man is not about your age or how tough you are. It is about having character and treating people with respect. Jake taught me practical things like how to read maps, how to budget money, and how to recognize trustworthy people from those who might want to take advantage of a kid alone on the road. He also shared stories about his own difficult childhood and how he had learned to rely on himself when his family let him down. "You are stronger than you know, son," he would say. "This experience is going to hurt for a while, but it is also going to make you into someone who can handle anything life throws at you." After 5 days, Jake offered to give me a ride to Durango in his truck. He was heading that direction anyway, and said it would be no trouble at all. But something inside me had changed during those days at the gas station. I had learned that I really could take care of myself, and I wanted to finish this journey on my own terms. I thanked Jake for everything he had taught me, but told him I was going to find another way to get to my grandparents' house. I used some of my remaining money to buy a ticket on a local bus that ran between Cortez and Durango. The bus ride took about 2 hours, and I spent the time looking out the window at the Colorado landscape, thinking about how different I felt compared to when I had made this same trip just a few days earlier. When the bus pulled into the station in Durango, I felt a sense of accomplishment that I had never experienced before. I had survived being abandoned. I had learned to take care of myself, and I had made it to my destination through my own determination. My grandparents' house was about 3 miles from the bus station, so I walked the rest of the way, carrying the small backpack I had managed to buy with my remaining money. When I knocked on their front door, Grandpa Johnson opened it with a huge smile that immediately changed to confusion and concern when he saw I was alone. "Diamond," he said, "where are your parents? Where is Marcus? Why are you here by yourself?" I broke down completely as I told him and Grandma Johnson what had happened. Grandpa's face went through the same progression of emotions I had seen on Rosa's face days earlier, but his anger was more intense than anything I had ever witnessed. He immediately called my parents' house, but there was no answer. Then he called the police in Phoenix to report what had happened. Grandma Johnson held me close and cried, telling me over and over that what my parents had done was not my fault and that they loved me unconditionally. The next few weeks were a blur of phone calls, legal meetings, and difficult conversations. My grandparents hired a lawyer and fought for custody of me, which they eventually won when it became clear that my parents had essentially abandoned their parental responsibilities. I learned that Marcus had been sent to stay with our aunt in California, and that my parents were dealing with serious financial problems that had apparently pushed them over the edge emotionally. I made the decision not to have any contact with my parents after that summer. The hurt and betrayal I felt was too deep to bridge even as I got older, and began to understand that they had been struggling with problems I could not have comprehended as a 12-year-old. I stayed with my grandparents through high school, and they provided me with the stability and love that I needed to heal from that traumatic experience. Marcus and I maintained a secret relationship through emails and letters. He understood why I could not forgive our parents, but he had been too young to fully grasp what had happened, and he eventually reconciled with them as he got older. I supported his decision, even though I could not make the same choice myself. We would meet occasionally when he visited our grandparents, and our bond as brothers remained strong despite everything that had torn our family apart. After high school, I earned a scholarship to study engineering at Colorado State University. I worked part-time jobs to support myself and graduated with honors 4 years later. I found a good job with a construction company in Denver, where I specialized in designing bridges and highway systems. The irony was not lost on me that I had built a career out of connecting places and helping people get from one destination to another safely. By the time I turned 28, I had my own apartment, a reliable car, and a savings account that would have seemed impossible to that scared 12-year-old boy sleeping behind a dumpster. I had also learned to trust people again, forming close friendships with coworkers and even dating seriously a few times. The experience of being abandoned had left scars, but it had also given me a strength and self-reliance that served me well in every aspect of my life. Last week, I received Marcus's wedding invitation in the mail. He was marrying a woman named Sarah, who he had met in college, and the ceremony was going to be held in Phoenix. I was genuinely happy for him and planned to attend, even though it meant returning to the city where I had grown up. But when I opened the envelope and saw that handwritten note from my mother, everything came flooding back. "We were wrong. Please come." Those 4 simple words represented 16 years of silence and pain. I sat at my kitchen table for hours, holding that piece of paper and trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to throw it away and pretend I had never seen it. But another part of me, the part that had grown and matured over all these years, knew that I needed to face this situation once and for all. I decided to attend Marcus's wedding, not because I was ready to reconcile with my parents, but because my brother deserved to have his family there on the most important day of his life. I flew to Phoenix and checked into a hotel near the church where the ceremony was being held. The night before the wedding, Marcus came to see me. He looked so much like our father that it was startling, but his personality was gentle and thoughtful like our grandmother. We talked for hours about everything that had happened and how it had affected both of our lives. Marcus told me that our parents had struggled with guilt and regret every day since that summer in Colorado. They had been going through a divorce at the time, dealing with bankruptcy, and fighting about everything from money to custody arrangements. In their emotional state, they had convinced themselves that forcing me to be independent would somehow prepare me for the difficult times they knew were coming. Of course, none of that justified what they had done, and Marcus was not trying to make excuses for them. He just wanted me to understand the context so that maybe I could find some peace with the situation. He also told me that they had never stopped loving me, even though they had made the terrible decision to express that love in the most destructive way possible. They had been too ashamed and prideful to reach out over the years, but they thought about me constantly and kept track of my accomplishments through my grandparents. The wedding ceremony was beautiful, and I was genuinely moved watching Marcus and Sarah exchange vows. When it came time for the reception, I knew I would have to face my parents directly for the first time in 16 years. They had aged significantly, and both of them looked smaller and more fragile than I remembered. My mother approached me first, her eyes filled with tears, and simply said, "I am sorry. I am so very sorry for what we did to you." My father stood behind her, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to find the right words. "We made a terrible mistake, Diamond," he said. "We were scared and desperate, and we took that out on you in the worst possible way. We do not expect you to forgive us, But we needed you to know that we have regretted that decision every single day since it happened. We love you, and we are proud of the man you have become despite everything we put you through. I looked at these two people who had given me life and then abandoned me when I needed them most. I felt a complex mixture of emotions, anger and sadness, and disappointment, but also a kind of peace that I had not expected. I realized that holding on to my resentment had not hurt them as much as it had hurt me. I had built a good life for myself, but I had also carried this burden of abandonment and rejection for 16 years. I forgave you a long time ago, I told them calmly. But forgiveness does not erase what happened, and it does not mean that we can just pick up where we left off. You made a choice that changed the course of my entire life. I survived it, and I became stronger because of it, but I also lost my childhood and my ability to trust easily. I wish you well, and I hope you have found peace with your decision, but I am not ready to have you back in my life in any meaningful way. My mother nodded through her tears, and my father reached out to shake my hand. I accepted the handshake, and we even shared a brief, awkward hug. It was not the dramatic reconciliation that might happen in a movie, but it was honest and real. I spent the rest of the reception talking with relatives I had not seen in years and celebrating my brother's happiness. When it was time to leave, I hugged Marcus tightly and promised to stay in better touch. As I drove back to the airport the next morning, I reflected on how that terrible experience when I was 12 years old had ultimately shaped me into someone I was proud to be. I had learned that I could survive anything, that there were good people in the world who would help a stranger in need, and that sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you are born into. Rosa Mister. Thompson, Jake, and my grandparents had all shown me different kinds of love and support when I needed it most. I also realized that my parents had taught me something valuable, even though it was not their intention. They had shown me exactly the kind of person I did not want to become. I would never abandon someone I claimed to love, and I would never put my own problems ahead of protecting someone who depended on me. Their failure as parents had become my blueprint for how to treat others with dignity and respect. The most important lesson I learned from that whole experience was that you cannot control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond to it. I could have let that abandonment turn me into someone bitter and closed off from the world. Instead, I chose to let it teach me compassion and resilience. I chose to become someone who would never leave another person behind, no matter how difficult the circumstances might be. Sometimes the family that abandons you teaches you the most about who you want to become. And sometimes the strangers who help you when you are lost become the family you choose. That scared 12-year-old boy sleeping behind a dumpster could never have imagined the life I have built for myself today. But every challenge I have faced since then has seemed manageable because I know I have already survived the worst thing that could happen to me. Have you ever had to forgive someone who hurt you deeply, even when they did not deserve it? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Do not forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming adversity and finding strength in difficult times. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that no matter what challenges you are facing right now, you are stronger than you know and capable of more than you can imagine. Sometimes our greatest trials become our greatest teachers, and the pain we endure today becomes the wisdom we share tomorrow.